It all started with a knock at the window. Sarah had just moved into her new home in the quiet suburbs, hoping for a fresh start after her recent breakup. The house was quaint, tucked away at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by tall, looming trees that made the area feel more secluded than she had anticipated. But that was what she wanted: privacy, a chance to heal, and the peace that came with solitude. The first night was uneventful. She unpacked, made herself a cup of tea, and curled up with a book in the living room. The house, though old, had a comforting charm. The wooden floors creaked softly underfoot, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. By the time she went to bed, she felt a sense of contentment, confident that she had made the right decision. But on the second night, as she lay in bed, just on the edge of sleep, she heard a soft, deliberate knock on her bedroom window. Startled, Sarah sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. She lived alone, and her bedroom was on the second floor. There was no way anyone could be at the window. She brushed it off as her imagination, the result of a long day and too many horror movies. The next night, the knocking came again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she stared at the window, half expecting to see someone peering in. But the curtains were drawn, and she couldn't bring herself to pull them back. Instead, she lay there, paralyzed with fear, until the knocking stopped. By the fourth night, Sarah was on edge, barely sleeping, her nerves frayed. She considered calling the police, but what would she say? That someone was knocking on her second-floor window in the dead of night? It sounded ridiculous, even to her. So, she decided to stay up, determined to catch whoever or whatever was behind it. She waited in the dark, her eyes glued to the window. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the clock on her bedside table. Midnight came and went, and Sarah began to think that maybe it was over, that the visitor, whoever it was, had moved on. But just as she was about to relax, the knock came again. This time, she was ready. Grabbing the flashlight she had placed on her nightstand, Sarah leaped out of bed and yanked the curtains open. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the window and the face that stared back at her. It was pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. The figure's mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile, and its fingers were pressed against the glass, leaving smudges that looked like blood. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. When she looked up again, the face was gone. Terrified, she spent the rest of the night in the living room, every light in the house turned on, her heart racing with fear. She knew she couldn't stay here, that something was terribly wrong with this house. The next morning, she called a realtor to put the house back on the market, determined to leave as soon as possible. But the visitor had other plans. That night, as she was packing her bags, the knocking started again, louder and more frantic than before. This time, it wasn't just at the bedroom window, it was at every window in the house. The sound echoed through the halls, a cacophony of terror that left Sarah trembling. She could hear it at the kitchen window, then the living room, then the bathroom. It was as if the figure was circling the house, searching for a way in. Panicking, Sarah called the police, her voice trembling as she explained the situation. They arrived within minutes, but when they searched the property, they found no signs of anyone outside. The windows were intact, the doors locked, and there was no evidence of forced entry. The officers assured her it was probably just a prank, maybe some local kids trying to scare her. But Sarah knew better. This was no prank. That night, she didn't sleep at all. She sat in the corner of her bedroom, clutching her phone, praying for the morning to come. But as the hours dragged on, the knocking grew louder, more aggressive. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, it stopped. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, Sarah dared to hope that it was over. But then she heard a soft, slow creaking, like the sound of a door being opened. Her heart stopped. She hadn't locked the back door, She had been so focused on the windows, on the knocking, that she had forgotten to lock the door. The creaking grew louder, closer, until she could hear it just outside her bedroom door. She held her breath, too scared to move, too scared to even blink. And then, the door slowly swung open. The figure stood in the doorway, its hollow eyes locked on her, that same twisted smile on its face. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at her. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of what to do. She could run, but where would she go? The figure was between her and the only exit. She could scream, but who would hear her? The house was isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away. She was trapped. The figure took a step forward, then another, each movement slow and deliberate. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her hands trembling as she reached for something, anything she could use to defend herself. But there was nothing, just the cold, hard wall at her back. As the figure drew closer, Sarah could see it more clearly. Its skin was pale, almost waxy, and its eyes were empty, black voids that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Its smile was wide, too wide, stretching across its face in a grotesque parody of joy. And then, it spoke. "You shouldn't have opened the curtains." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it was enough to send a jolt of terror through Sarah's body. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She was frozen, trapped in the gaze of this thing that should not exist. The figure was inches away now, its cold breath brushing against her face. Sarah's vision blurred, her mind screaming at her to do something, anything. But it was too late. The last thing she saw was the figure's face, twisted in that horrible smile, before everything went black. The next morning, the police found her body in the bedroom, the curtains drawn, the windows locked from the inside. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of a struggle. The only clue was a single smudge on the glass, a handprint too large and too distorted to belong to any human. The house was put back on the market, but it never sold. The locals whispered about the girl who had died there, about the strange events that had led up to her death. Some said it was a curse, others that it was something far worse. But no one dared to go near the house, especially not after midnight. And as for the visitor? It's still there, waiting. Waiting for someone to open the curtains.